The rain had been falling since dawn, turning the Montana trails into rivers of mud and cutting deep grooves through the hills west of Red Creek. Nathaniel Cross hated every mile of the journey. By the time his wagon reached the narrow crossing near Blackstone Ranch, one wheel had sunk nearly to the axle, a harness strap had snapped, and his lead horse had thrown a shoe on the rocky incline. Nathaniel stepped down into ankle-deep mud with a curse that disappeared into the wind. At 39, he was one of the richest cattle barons in the territory, owner of thousands of acres and more cattle than most towns had people. Men usually hurried when he spoke. Doors usually opened before he reached them. But the storm did not care about wealth, and neither did the broken road stretching toward the distant ranch house. He walked the final mile through cold rain that soaked his black duster coat and ran down the brim of his hat. By the time the lights of Blackstone Ranch appeared through the trees, he was wet, exhausted, and in a temper dangerous enough to make grown men avoid his path. The ranch house was not what he expected. He had imagined a grand breeding estate with carved columns and polished brass, the sort of place wealthy ranchers built to impress visitors. Instead, the house was large but simple, made of weathered timber with a wide porch and lanterns glowing warmly against the storm. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the scent of applewood. Nathaniel climbed the steps and knocked hard enough to rattle the door. It opened almost immediately. A woman stood there holding a lantern. She wore a plain gray dress with rolled sleeves and no jewelry except a small silver watch pinned near her collar. Damp strands of brown hair had escaped the knot at the back of her head. Her hands looked strong, not delicate, and there was a faint smear of ink on one finger. Nathaniel barely looked at her. "You there," he said sharply. "Take my coat and tell your employer that Nathaniel Cross is waiting. And I do not wait long." The woman regarded him for a brief moment, her expression unreadable. Then she took the dripping coat from his shoulders with careful hands. "Yes, sir," she said. He stepped inside. The warmth struck him first. A fire crackled at the far end of the hall, and the air smelled of beeswax, apples, and wood smoke. The stone floor had been scrubbed clean despite the storm, and a large blue and white bowl filled with late autumn roses sat on a table by the stairs. Somewhere upstairs, a clock ticked slowly, unhurried by weather, wealth, or impatience. Nathaniel felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest and immediately resented it. "Well," he snapped, "go fetch the owner." The woman hung his coat near the fire. "May I take your gloves, sir? You may be quick about it." She was not quick. She moved with the same calm rhythm as the ticking clock, and it irritated him more than open defiance would have. As she set his ruined gloves aside to dry, her gaze dropped briefly to his boots. "You walked from the crossing," she observed. "I did. That crossing becomes dangerous after heavy rain. We've requested repairs 3 times this year." "I didn't come here to discuss roads," Nathaniel replied. "I came to buy a horse. Then perhaps you should have tea while you wait." "I'll have the owner," he said. Within 15 minutes, a small smile touched her lips, not mocking exactly, but private, as though she had just heard a joke she intended to keep to herself. "I shall see what can be done, sir." She disappeared through a side door. Nathaniel paced the hall, growing more irritated with every minute. Yet he found himself noticing details he could not ignore. Well-used books stacked near the window, an open ledger covered in neat columns of figures, a large map of the ranch pinned to the wall with penciled notes marking fences, drainage ditches, and pasture rotations. Nothing looked ornamental. Everything looked purposeful. 20 minutes later, a ranch hand appeared. "Mr. Cross," he said respectfully, "the owner will see you in the estate office." Nathaniel followed him down a corridor and entered a broad room lined with shelves of records and breeding charts. He stopped dead. The woman who had taken his coat sat behind the desk. She had not changed her dress or attempted to make herself look more impressive. A ledger lay open before her, and a fountain pen rested between her fingers. She rose. "Mr. Cross," she said evenly, "I'm Clara Hayes. Blackstone Ranch belongs to me. Please, have a seat." For a moment Nathaniel could not speak. "You," he stared at her. "You were the one at the door." "Yes. You let me believe you were a servant." Clara's brown eyes met his steadily. "You didn't require any help reaching that conclusion." The words landed harder than a slap. Nathaniel became painfully aware of every command he had given, every dismissive glance, every arrogant assumption made in that hallway. "I owe you an apology," he said at last, the words rough in his throat. "Most men in your position would pretend nothing happened," Clara replied, sitting down again. "An apology is a better beginning." He took the chair opposite her. "I came because my sister is dying." The room fell silent. Nathaniel had not planned to say it. He had avoided speaking the truth aloud for months, as though silence might delay the inevitable. Clara set down her pen. "I'm sorry," she said simply. No dramatic sympathy, no shocked exclamation, just quiet acknowledgement. He found himself continuing. "Emily has a lung disease. The doctors give her little time. When she was 15, she owned a gray mare she loved more than anything. After our father died, the horse had to be sold. She recently saw a catalog listing a gray mare bred here at Blackstone Ranch. Moonmist," Clara said softly. "You know the horse? I bred her. Then I want to buy her," Nathaniel said. "I don't care what she costs." Clara leaned back in her chair. "Moonmist is not for sale today." His head lifted sharply. "Excuse me? You've ridden through a storm, walked a mile in grief, and arrived angry enough to buy the wrong horse for the right reason," she said calmly. "Stay the night. Meet her tomorrow when you're no longer trying to outrun your sorrow." Nathaniel stared at the woman across the desk, the woman he had mistaken for a maid less than an hour earlier. For the first time in years, someone had refused his money without hesitation, and for reasons he did not yet understand. That refusal unsettled him far more than the storm outside. Nathaniel intended to leave Blackstone Ranch the next morning. That had been his plan as he lay awake in the guest room, listening to the rain tap against the windows. He would inspect the gray mare, pay whatever Clara Hayes demanded, and return home before another night passed. But morning changed something. The storm had disappeared, leaving the ranch washed clean beneath a pale golden sunrise. Thin mist drifted across the pastures, and the distant mountains glowed beneath fresh snow. From his bedroom window, Nathaniel watched ranch hands already at work. Gates opened. Horses were led toward training fields. Wagons rolled across the yard. The entire ranch moved with quiet purpose. He dressed and stepped outside. Before anyone noticed him, he saw Clara. She stood alone in the training ring with a young chestnut colt. The horse tossed its head nervously, stamping the ground and refusing to obey one of the stable hands. Instead of forcing the animal, Clara dismissed the worker with a smile. "Let me try." She approached slowly. No rope pulled tight, no raised voice, no whip. She simply rested one hand against the colt's neck and waited. Minutes passed. Nathaniel watched from the fence, expecting impatience. Instead, he witnessed trust. The frightened horse gradually lowered its head. Clara spoke so quietly he couldn't hear the words, but somehow the nervous animal relaxed completely. Within moments, the colt followed her willingly around the ring. One of the older ranch hands noticed Nathaniel watching. "Never seen anyone train horses like Miss Hayes," he said proudly. "She's been doing it long enough that even stubborn horses know better than argue." Nathaniel couldn't help asking, "Where's her trainer?" The old ranch hand laughed. "You're looking at her." Nathaniel said nothing. For the first time, he realized Blackstone Ranch wasn't successful because of expensive bloodlines or wealthy investors. It succeeded because of Clara. Breakfast was unlike any business meeting Nathaniel had ever attended. Instead of servants waiting silently against the walls, everyone, from ranch foremen to cooks, shared the same long wooden table. Clara sat among them. She discussed pasture rotations with one worker, feed supplies with another, and listened carefully when a stable boy mentioned a loose fence near the eastern creek. Every person spoke freely. Every opinion mattered. Nathaniel found himself strangely out of place. At his own estate, people waited for orders. Here, they offered ideas. After breakfast, Clara stood. "If you'd still like to see Moonmist," she said, "I'll introduce you." Nathaniel followed her toward the breeding fields. The gray mare stood grazing beneath a cottonwood tree. She was magnificent. Silver-gray coat, strong shoulders, calm eyes. She lifted her head as Clara approached, and walked over without hesitation. Clara rubbed the mare's neck. "This is Moon Mist." Nathaniel reached out carefully. The horse didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned gently into his hand. "I've never seen a horse this calm. That's because she trusts people. You trained her? I raised her from the day she was born." Nathaniel studied both woman and horse. Somehow they shared the same quiet confidence. Instead of discussing price, Clara suggested they ride. For the next several hours they crossed rolling hills, open meadows, and narrow forest trails. Nathaniel expected conversation to revolve around horses. Instead, Clara pointed toward irrigation channels, grazing patterns, and freshly planted trees. She knew every acre, every stream, every fence post. At one point, she stopped beside a newly repaired bridge. "We rebuilt this last spring. You hired contractors?" She smiled. "No, we built it ourselves." Nathaniel looked closer. The workmanship was remarkable. "You know construction?" "I learned because I couldn't afford not to." Her answer stayed with him long after they continued riding. That evening they sat on the porch, overlooking the ranch as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. For the first time, Nathaniel asked a personal question. "How did you build all this?" Clara remained silent for a moment. "I wasn't born here." She looked across the fields. "My father was a schoolteacher. When he died, there wasn't enough money to keep our little house. I was 19. I took work teaching children in another town." Nathaniel listened quietly. "I saved every dollar I could. Later, I became a bookkeeper for a ranch owner. I learned accounting, then land management, then breeding records." She laughed softly. "Most men assumed I was simply writing numbers. They never noticed I was learning how to run everything." Nathaniel smiled despite himself. "What happened next?" "I spent nearly 10 years saving money. When this ranch failed, everyone said it wasn't worth buying. The buildings were falling apart. The fences were broken. The fields were dry. There were more weeds than grass. So I bought it. Alone. Alone. Weren't you afraid?" "Every single day." She looked toward the barns where lanterns had begun glowing. "But fear doesn't repair roofs. It doesn't feed horses. It doesn't pay wages. So every morning I went back to work." Nathaniel imagined the lonely years. One woman, a ruined ranch, no wealthy family, no powerful name, only determination. For the first time in many years, he felt genuine admiration instead of polite respect. Nathaniel remained at Blackstone Ranch another day, then another. He began helping wherever he could. He repaired a broken gate beside 2 ranch hands. He carried sacks of grain into the barn. He brushed horses before sunrise. Nobody treated him like a cattle baron. Nobody bowed. Nobody flattered him. Oddly enough, he preferred it. Each evening, he wrote a letter to his younger sister, Emily. At first, the letters described Moon Mist. Then they described the ranch. Eventually, they became almost entirely about Clara. He wrote about how every horse followed her voice, how children from nearby farms waved when she rode through town, how every worker trusted her completely. In one letter, he admitted something he barely understood himself. "Emily, I have spent my life believing money builds greatness. I was wrong. Character does." Several days later, Emily's reply arrived. Her handwriting had become weaker, but her humor remained. "Brother, you were supposed to buy a horse, not lose your heart." Nathaniel folded the letter with an embarrassed smile. Perhaps Emily understood him better than he understood himself. The following morning, Clara led Moon Mist into the yard. The mare stood perfectly still. "I've made my decision," Clara said. Nathaniel looked at her. "Moon Mist belongs with your sister. I'll sell her." He reached for his checkbook immediately. "Name your price." Clara shook her head. "I'll charge exactly what she's worth." "You could ask for twice that." "I could, but grief shouldn't cost extra." Nathaniel looked at the woman standing beside the silver mare. Days earlier, he had mistaken her for a servant. Now he realized she possessed something money could never buy: integrity. As the ranch hands prepared Moon Mist for the long journey home, Nathaniel found himself looking back toward the ranch house again and again. He had come to Blackstone Ranch searching for a horse. He was leaving with something far more dangerous: a reason to return. Nathaniel returned to Cross Hollow with Moon Mist walking calmly behind his wagon, but his thoughts never truly left Blackstone Ranch. Emily was waiting on the porch, wrapped in a thick wool blanket despite the mild autumn afternoon. Her illness had stolen much of her strength. Yet the moment she saw the silver-gray mare, her face lit up with the brightest smile Nathaniel had seen in months. "She's beautiful," Emily whispered as tears filled her eyes. Moon Mist lowered her head, as if she already understood the fragile woman standing before her. Emily reached out with trembling fingers and gently stroked the mare's neck. "I've dreamed about a horse like this for years." Nathaniel smiled. "Her name is Moon Mist." "And who chose her?" "The owner of Blackstone Ranch." Emily looked toward her brother. "Did she come with you?" "No." Emily frowned slightly. "That's a shame. I'd like to thank her myself." Nathaniel avoided her eyes. "I didn't think she'd leave her ranch." Emily watched him carefully. "You've been talking about her ever since your first letter." "I've talked about the horse." Emily laughed softly. "No, Nathaniel. You've talked about the woman." He didn't answer. For the first time in years, Emily saw her brother blush. Weeks passed, but Blackstone Ranch refused to leave Nathaniel's mind. Every business meeting felt longer. Every dinner tasted dull. Every evening, he found himself rereading Clara's brief notes about Moon Mist's feeding schedule and training routine. Finally, unable to ignore the pull any longer, he saddled his horse and rode back west. He told everyone he was going to inspect grazing land. Even he knew it was a lie. When he arrived at Blackstone Ranch, Clara looked up from repairing a broken wagon wheel. "I wondered how long it would take." Nathaniel smiled awkwardly. "You expected me?" "I expected an excuse." She wiped grease from her hands. "So, what's today's reason?" He cleared his throat. "I happen to be in the area." "You happen to ride nearly 60 miles?" She raised one eyebrow. "That's impressive timing." For the first time in years, Nathaniel laughed at himself. "I suppose I deserve that." "You usually do." They both laughed. It felt strangely natural. Over the following weeks, Nathaniel became a familiar visitor. Sometimes he stayed only a day. Sometimes 3. He helped repair fences, inspected breeding stock, and even joined ranch hands during morning chores. He no longer behaved like a wealthy landowner. He behaved like someone grateful simply to be included. One afternoon, he noticed the narrow wooden bridge crossing the creek just outside Clara's property. Several boards had rotted through. A loaded wagon could collapse at any time. Without mentioning it to Clara, Nathaniel quietly hired builders from the nearest town. Within days, the dangerous crossing had been replaced with a sturdy timber bridge. He felt satisfied until Clara arrived. She rode into Cross Hollow before sunrise, dust covering her boots and determination burning in her eyes. Nathaniel met her in the courtyard. "I hear congratulations are in order," Clara said. "For what?" "For repairing my bridge without asking." Nathaniel blinked. "I thought I was helping." "You were deciding." "There is a difference." He frowned. "It was falling apart." "So you decided I couldn't manage it?" "I never said that." "You didn't have to." Her voice remained calm, but every word landed with quiet force. "I've spent 15 years making my own decisions, Nathaniel. If I need help, I'll ask. What I won't accept is someone solving my problems because they assume they know better." Nathaniel looked down. He suddenly remembered the first day they met. Once again, he had made assumptions. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. "I wasn't trying to control you." "I know." Clara's expression softened. "But kindness offered without respect can still feel like disrespect." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "I understand." "No." She smiled gently. "I think you're beginning to." The disagreement became the strongest foundation their friendship had yet built. Nathaniel stopped trying to rescue Clara. Instead, he started asking questions. He listened more than he spoke. When Clara visited Cross Hollow to see Emily, she noticed things Nathaniel had overlooked for years. She examined feed invoices, stable records, payroll books. Within 2 afternoons, she discovered several suppliers had quietly increased prices while charging for grain that never arrived. Nathaniel stared at the figures in disbelief. "How long has this been happening?" "Nearly 4 years." "And nobody noticed?" Clara looked at him with a teasing smile. "They noticed." They simply assumed you were too wealthy to care. Nathaniel dismissed the dishonest suppliers before sunset. For the first time, he began personally visiting his own barns every morning. His workers were shocked. His ranch quickly became more efficient than it had been in years. "You've changed," his old ranch manager admitted. Nathaniel smiled. "I'm finally paying attention." Emily noticed the change as well. Her brother laughed more often. He no longer shut himself inside his office after dinner. Sometimes he even spoke about the future. One quiet evening, she invited him onto the porch. "You love her." Nathaniel looked across the fields where moon mist grazed peacefully. "Yes." The word came easier than expected. Emily smiled. "Then tell her." Nathaniel remained silent. After a long pause, he shook his head. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "I'm Nathaniel Cross." Emily laughed. "I was aware. You know what people in Helena are like." She did. Montana's wealthy families guarded their reputations fiercely. Every invitation, every marriage, every friendship was judged. Clara built her ranch with her own hands. Nathaniel continued quietly. "She earned every acre. If she married me—" He stopped. Emily finished the sentence. "They'd look down on her. They'd whisper. They'd call her an opportunist. They'd pretend she wasn't good enough." Nathaniel nodded. "I can ignore gossip." She shouldn't have to. Emily reached for his hand. "You can't spend your life protecting someone from words that haven't even been spoken." He looked at her. What if they hurt her? Emily smiled sadly. "Then stand beside her." He frowned. "I don't understand. My illness has taught me something." "What?" "The world always finds something to judge." She squeezed his hand. "The question isn't whether people approve. The question is whether the right person is standing beside you when they don't." Nathaniel looked toward the western horizon where the setting sun painted the mountains gold. For the first time, his fear no longer seemed stronger than his hope. The next morning before sunrise, he saddled his favorite horse. One small velvet box rested inside his saddlebag. As the first light touched the peaks beyond the valley, Nathaniel rode toward Blackstone Ranch with only one purpose in his heart. He wasn't returning to buy another horse. He was returning to ask Clara Hayes to spend the rest of her life with him. Nathaniel reached Blackstone Ranch just after sunrise. The valley shimmered beneath a blanket of silver mist, and the first rays of sunlight painted the barns and fences in warm gold. Clara was already awake. He spotted her near the eastern pasture, checking a newborn foal while speaking with one of the ranch hands. She looked up as his horse approached. "You certainly enjoy arriving before breakfast," she called with a smile. Nathaniel climbed down from his saddle, but this time he wasn't smiling. "There is something important I need to ask you." Clara noticed the seriousness in his face. "Then we'd better talk somewhere quiet." They walked toward the ranch office where their friendship had truly begun. The same oak desk stood beside the window. The same ledgers covered one side of the room. It felt as though nothing had changed. Yet everything had. Nathaniel stood silently for a long moment before finally speaking. "When I first came here, I judged you without knowing a single thing about you." Clara folded her arms. "You've apologized for that more than once." "I know, but I haven't thanked you." "For what?" "For refusing to let me remain the man I was." Clara's expression softened. Nathaniel took a slow breath. "I love you." The words hung quietly between them. "I didn't expect this. I tried to ignore it. I tried convincing myself it would disappear. It didn't." He reached into his coat and removed a small velvet box. "I want you to marry me." For several seconds, Clara simply stared at him. Then she slowly closed the box without opening it. "I'm sorry." Nathaniel felt the air leave his lungs. "No." She shook her head gently. "I can't." He searched her face, hoping to find uncertainty. Instead, he found sadness. "Don't you love me?" Her eyes glistened. "That isn't the problem." "Then tell me what is." Clara walked to the window overlooking the ranch. "You see those barns?" Nathaniel nodded. "I built them." She pointed toward the distant hills. "I repaired every fence, every pasture, every stable. I worked 15 years to build Blackstone Ranch." She turned toward him. "If I marry you, people won't remember any of that. They'll say it belongs to the wealthy Nathaniel Cross." They'll say I was rescued. They'll say everything I built only mattered after your name was attached to mine. Nathaniel listened quietly. She continued, the law won't help me either. Once we're married, this ranch becomes yours as much as mine. My life's work, my home, my identity. I know you would never intentionally take those things, but the world would. She lowered her eyes. I've spent too many years earning my independence to lose it now. Nathaniel understood. For the first time, he wasn't hearing fear. He was hearing the cost of everything she had sacrificed. He gently took back the ring box. Is that your only reason? Clara looked surprised. Isn't it enough? It is. He smiled softly. And it's something I can fix. 3 days later, Nathaniel returned. This time, he wasn't alone. An older attorney stepped out of the carriage carrying several leather folders. Clara greeted them with obvious confusion. What is all this? Nathaniel placed the documents on her desk. I spent the last 72 hours with my lawyer. She opened the first folder. Inside were legal agreements transferring complete ownership of Blackstone Ranch to Clara forever. Even after marriage, even after Nathaniel's death, no future child could claim it. No business partner, no relative, no court. The ranch would remain hers alone. Clara looked up in disbelief. You would sign this? I already have. She quickly turned the pages. Every signature was there. Every seal. Every witness. Nathaniel stepped closer. I don't want your ranch. I don't want your horses. I don't want your success. I want the woman who created all of it. He smiled. You once taught me that helping someone without asking can become an insult. So this time, he extended his hand. I'm asking. Tears filled Clara's eyes. I've never known a man willing to give away power. Nathaniel laughed quietly. I've spent most of my life collecting things. You taught me that some things become valuable only after you let go of them. Clara looked down at the ring once more, then back into his eyes. Yes, the single word carried years of hope. She slipped the ring onto her finger before wrapping her arms around him. Outside, the ranch hands erupted into cheers after realizing what had happened. News of their engagement spread across Montana within days. Not everyone celebrated. Some wealthy ranch owners whispered that Nathaniel had chosen beneath his station. Others claimed Clara had trapped one of the richest men in the territory. The harshest comments came during the annual Governor's Winter Ball in Helena. Nathaniel insisted they attend together. The ballroom glittered beneath crystal chandeliers. Elegant gowns filled the room. Conversations stopped as Nathaniel entered with Clara beside him. Every eye followed them. A wealthy widow approached, wearing a smile that never reached her eyes. So this is Miss Hayes, she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. I've heard you once kept books and cleaned stables. The room grew silent. Nathaniel felt Clara gently squeeze his arm. Before he could answer, she stepped forward herself. I did. The widow blinked. I also repaired roofs, built fences, raised horses, managed accounts, paid wages, and created one of the finest breeding ranches in Montana. She smiled politely. I've never been ashamed of honest work. If more people here had done some, perhaps they'd spend less time talking about those who have. A few guests laughed. Others hid smiles behind their glasses. The widow's face turned crimson. An older cattle rancher stepped forward. Miss Hayes. He tipped his hat respectfully. I've heard remarkable things about your breeding program. Another guest asked about pasture management. Then another. Within minutes, people surrounded Clara. Not to judge her, but to learn from her. Nathaniel stood quietly beside her, remembering Emily's words. Stand beside her. That was all she had ever asked. They married the following spring beneath a wide cottonwood tree overlooking Blackstone Ranch. Wildflowers covered the hills. The ranch workers decorated the fences with ribbons and fresh greenery. Emily attended in a comfortable carriage. Though weaker than ever, she smiled throughout the ceremony. After the vows, she embraced Clara. You gave my brother back to himself. Clara kissed her forehead. And you gave him the courage to come back. Only a few months later, Emily passed away peacefully. Nathaniel mourned deeply. Clara never tried to rush his grief. She simply remained beside him through every difficult day, proving that love isn't measured by grand speeches, but by quiet presence. Years passed. Blackstone Ranch flourished. Cross Hollow prospered. Together, they introduced better breeding methods, improved irrigation, and treated every worker with fairness and respect. People who had once mocked Clara now traveled across the territory, seeking her advice. One rainy autumn evening, Nathaniel returned home soaked after inspecting cattle along the northern range. As he stepped into the ranch house, Clara met him at the door. Without saying a word, she removed his wet coat and hung it beside the fire. Then she smiled with the same playful expression she had worn years before. "Welcome home, sir." Nathaniel laughed until tears filled his eyes. He wrapped his arms around her. "It's remarkable," he whispered. "What is?" "The greatest mistake of my life became the greatest blessing God ever gave me." Clara rested her head against his shoulder. "Only because," she said softly, "you chose to open your eyes a second time." Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows, but inside the warm ranch house, where their story had first begun, they had finally found the home they had both been searching for all along.